Okay, hi guys. This one is going to be super short and sweet and to the point. Your exam this week actually only has 13 questions. Yes, you heard me correctly, 13. Most of them are all kind of like list and explain, a lot like what you saw in some of your questions last week, but the majority of them are going to be that way this week. There is only one little, your very first question is a matching over a little bit of vocab, but really the rest of it is kind of getting into the meat of a couple of these sections. So like as you're going through section 1, understanding how do you figure out basically which things are legitimate and which aren't when you're reading, when you're researching, what's going to make it have higher credibility, what's going to make it have lower credibility. So the big thing you're really going to have to kind of discuss in there is what are some of the sources of information that lists a whole bunch in your book, but what are those sources? And then being able to talk about a couple of them and say, this source would be considered very legitimate or not legitimate. Obviously, from an academic standpoint, I will just tell you in general, a lot of times when we have kids' research papers and things like that, one of the things we often require is to have a peer-reviewed journal as part of your research, because you know that it's been through a process of not only having an expert supposedly write it, but then it has been reviewed by other supposed experts in the field, which seems to make it have a little bit more credibility. So you're going to read through some of that type of stuff, just be able to talk about some of those sources of information, knowing high credibility versus low credibility. Okay, that first section is really pretty much just about that. When you get into the second section, one of your big questions is really going to be about those knowing those laws, okay, that we've implemented. You are not going to have to write about every single one, but you are going to have to write about a couple of them. So you need to know the names of them, of all of them, and then you're going to have to be able to talk about in detail a couple of them. So make sure that you have that information handy, or that you've really researched it and read over it. Okay. You're also going to have to talk about the government agencies. So not just the laws, but what agencies do we have in the United States and what is their purpose? The big thing that I'm going to look at in there is something like, what's the difference between the USDA and the CDC? Like what impact specifically does the USDA have on food and nutrition and food safety, okay, versus what kind of things is the CDC going to be responsible for or help with or look at, okay? So knowing all of those, again, knowing all of those organizations and being able to discuss them is really important. Okay, so I would be prepared to actually talk about every single one of those, because we do need to know what those different parts of our government are responsible for, and well, a lot of times what they can and can't do. So something like you guys kind of got a little bit into supplements, and that supplements aren't really regulated by the FDA, or sometimes they aren't, based on the, what they're putting on the label and things like that. So most supplements are not. And so then there's different requirements. If they're not monitored by that, how do we know what they're putting in that product? Okay, so make sure you're just kind of aware of that. And that's pretty much everything out of that section. Let's see. Now, when you get to page 302, you're going to see a couple different charts. Those are going to be important for you as well. So things like what can we put on a package? What's a legitimate health claim? What's not? So what's prohibited? What is permissible? Knowing some of the top herbs that are used and what their use is. What do they do? Same things for the non-essential vitamins and the popular nutritional substances. All those things are on the same page. So again, have that in front of you. Maybe print those pages off. It's 302 and 303 in your book. So however you want to have those available, that would definitely help you. Okay. That's it in that section. When you get to 6.3, you are going to do a little bit with what are the food additives, and again, being able to discuss a few of those. Okay, there's also a chart for that, so that might even be easier. Your chart is on page 306, and it just talks about the different categories of food additives and what are their function. So you're going to need some of that information. What are some fat substitutes that are stabilizing agents? Okay, knowing those, being able to talk a little bit about fake fat. Okay, knowing your sugar substitutes versus your artificial sweeteners, knowing what those are and being able to talk about a couple of them again is going to be important. This is a really big, especially the sugar, well, even the fats, it's a really big issue right now. A lot of diets, and you guys kind of did some of the special diets and fad diets in one of your discussions, but they're really starting to get into how bad some of those things can be for you, especially some of the artificial sweeteners and things like that. I want to say somebody did talk about Whole30. I know Whole30. One of my good friends did it. I'm kind of participating in it right now to see how it, just to give it a shot and see what it's like. And that's one of the things they really strongly, you're not supposed to have any sugar, any artificial sweeteners, anything like that. So make sure you know a little bit of information about that. When you get into 6.4 on, that's when you're going to see more of your vocab that's going to come in that first question. Knowing things like what is an ecosystem, bacteria versus virus, things like that. But I think, let's see here, you are going to have to talk about, there's another chart, it's a big chart, page 313 and 314, that has a lot of your common foodborne illnesses and their causes. And so you're going to have to be able to discuss a few of those in detail with all those same categories that are in that chart. So you're going to need to know what is the organism, what food can contribute to that, what's the onset, what are the symptoms, how do we prevent it. Okay, so make sure you're really familiar with that as well. And then again, a lot of it is your terminology, okay, and your matching questions that you're going to have. And then when you get into 6.5, you're going to have to talk about some of the different factors that affect microbial, sorry, don't say that, growth. So things like the temperature, things like what are we putting in it, what extra things are we putting in it, the pH, the water. And so you're going to have to be able to just know those things and then discuss a couple of them as well. You're going to have to know the other food concerns that come right after that. So things like toxins and chemical poisoning. But the big one that I'm going to have you discuss there is GMOs, because GMOs is really huge right now. And it's really important that we understand why is that hazardous, what's going on with those. So be prepared to talk quite a bit about GMOs. Which obviously are genetically modified organisms, if you have not read this or didn't know that. But we really just want to know those. Obviously, you see a lot of things out now, non-GMO, and a lot of people don't really even understand what that's about. So be able to describe that and discuss that quite a bit. Let's see, and then I think the rest of it is a lot of terminology, and that's, like I said, all of your vocab is going to be in that very first question that's matching. Everything else is going to be name these things and discuss a couple of them, or like I said, in some of them that are more important, it might say literally name and describe all of these. Okay, you're also going to have to talk about your the food label project that you did, and just discussing what have you learned about food labels, the nutrition involved in it, how do you read them, how can they be deceiving, all of that information. So again, if you have any questions, you guys are doing a really, really great job. Everybody is participating in discussions and everybody's doing well on exams. So I'm not really too concerned about it, but if you have any questions, let me know. And like always, it'll be due Sunday night. So happy testing.